The morning mist hung heavy over the industrial district of Detroit as Marcus Williams pulled his pickup truck into the loading dock behind Riverside Scrap Metal. At 52, Marcus had been working the early shift for nearly 15 years, his weathered hands and calloused palms telling the story of a man who'd never shied away from hard work. The October air bit through his worn flannel shirt, and he could see his breath as he stepped out of the truck. Marcus had always preferred the quiet hours before dawn. The scrapyard was peaceful then, just him and the towering piles of twisted metal and abandoned machinery that most people saw as junk, but he viewed as raw material waiting for a second chance. There was something poetic about taking broken things and giving them new purpose. Though Marcus would never admit to such thoughts out loud, he grabbed his thermos of black coffee and headed toward the sorting area, his steel-toed boots crunching on the gravel path. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it over the distant hum of early morning traffic. A soft whimper, like a wounded animal trying to stay hidden. Marcus stopped, tilting his head to listen. The sound came again, barely audible but definitely there. He followed the noise through the maze of stacked car parts and industrial debris, his experienced eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Stray cats and dogs sometimes wandered into the yard looking for shelter, and Marcus had a soft spot for strays of all kinds. The whimpering led him to a section of the yard where old drums and barrels were stored before being processed. Most were dented and rusty, remnants of Detroit's industrial past. But one barrel, a large blue plastic drum that had once held industrial solvent, was positioned differently than the others, tilted slightly and wedged between two larger containers. Marcus approached carefully, the sound growing clearer with each step. It wasn't an animal at all. It was human, small, frightened, and trying desperately to stay quiet. "Hey there," Marcus called softly, crouching down near the barrel. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The whimpering stopped abruptly, replaced by the kind of silence that only comes from someone holding their breath in terror. Marcus's heart clenched as he realized what he was dealing with, a child, hiding in his scrapyard, scared enough to crawl inside a discarded barrel for protection. "My name's Marcus," he continued, his voice gentle but clear. "You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you here." Slowly, carefully, Marcus reached toward the barrel's opening. A pair of dark eyes peered out at him from the shadows inside. Huge, frightened eyes in a face that couldn't have belonged to anyone older than 7 or 8 years old. The child was a boy, Marcus realized, with matted dark hair and skin that spoke of days, maybe weeks, without proper washing. "What's your name, son?" Marcus asked, extending his hand palm up in a gesture of peace. The boy didn't answer, just stared at Marcus with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust adults. His small frame was curled up inside the barrel, like a frightened animal, and Marcus could see that the child's clothes, a torn t-shirt and jeans that were far too big for his tiny frame, hung loose on his malnourished body. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. How long had this child been hiding here? Where were his parents? How had he survived in Detroit's harsh urban environment? And what circumstances had driven him to seek shelter in a scrapyard barrel? "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked, pulling a granola bar from his lunch bag. The boy's eyes immediately locked onto the food, and the subtle way his tongue darted across his cracked lips told Marcus everything he needed to know about the child's condition. Marcus unwrapped the granola bar slowly, making sure the boy could see his movements. "Here you go," he said, placing it on the ground just outside the barrel. "Take your time. Nobody's rushing you." After what felt like an eternity, a small, dirty hand emerged from the barrel and grabbed the food. The boy ate with the desperate efficiency of someone who didn't know when his next meal might come, barely pausing to chew before swallowing each bite. As Marcus watched, his throat tightened with emotion. He thought of his own childhood in Detroit's East Side, the nights when his single mother had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. But even in their poorest moments, he'd never been alone, never been reduced to hiding in a barrel and scavenging for food. "Where's your family, son?" Marcus asked gently. The boy finished the granola bar and retreated deeper into the barrel, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. hoarse from dehydration and fear. "Don't got no family," the boy said, his grammar reflecting a lack of formal education. "Mama went away. Foster people, they were mean." Marcus felt his jaw clench involuntarily. The child was a runaway from the foster system, a system that was supposed to protect kids like him, but had apparently failed so completely that living in a scrapyard seemed like the better option. "How long have you been out here?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. The boy held up 3 fingers, then seemed to reconsider and held up 4. "Days," he clarified. "Maybe more. Hard to remember." Marcus looked at the child's condition, the sunken cheeks, the way his clothes hung on his skeletal frame, the exhaustion evident in every line of his small body. 4 days without proper food or shelter would be devastating for an adult, let alone a child who couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds. "What's your name?" Marcus tried again, his voice as gentle as he could make it. This time the boy answered. "Eli," he whispered. "Eli Morrison." "Eli," Marcus repeated, committing the name to memory. "That's a good name. A strong name." Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He couldn't leave this child here, couldn't walk away and pretend he hadn't seen the desperation in those dark eyes. But he also knew that approaching the situation wrong could send Eli running back into the danger streets of Detroit. "Eli," Marcus said carefully, "I need to go get some things, more food, some water, maybe a blanket. Will you stay right here? Will you wait for me?" The boy's eyes widened with panic. "You gonna call the police? The foster people?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "I'm not calling anyone. I just want to help. You have my word on that." Marcus pulled out his wallet and showed Eli his driver's license. "See, Marcus Williams, that's me. I work here, and I come here every day. This is my scrapyard, which means it's safe. Nobody's going to hurt you here." Something in Marcus's tone must have convinced the boy, because Eli nodded slightly. "You'll come back. I promise," Marcus said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. As Marcus drove to the nearest convenience store, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel, he tried to process what he'd just committed to. He was a single man with no experience raising children, living in a modest apartment in a neighborhood that had seen better days. His ex-wife had left him 5 years ago, partly because of his inability to give her the family she'd wanted, a painful irony that wasn't lost on him now. But as he filled a shopping cart with sandwiches, fruit, bottles of water, and a small blanket, Marcus realized that none of those obstacles mattered. That child, Eli, needed someone to care about him, and Marcus had spent too many years feeling like his life lacked purpose to walk away from this moment. When he returned to the scrapyard 30 minutes later, his heart nearly stopped. The barrel was empty. "Eli," Marcus called out, trying to keep the panic from his voice. "Eli, it's Marcus. I brought food." For a terrifying moment, he thought the boy had run, but then he heard a small voice from behind a pile of car doors. "You came back." Eli emerged slowly, his eyes still wary, but with something new in his expression, the tiniest spark of hope. "I told you I would," Marcus said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "And I always keep my promises." As Eli devoured the sandwich Marcus had brought, the older man made another promise to himself. Somehow, some way, he was going to make sure this child never had to hide in a barrel again. The employee break room at Riverside Scrap Metal had never been used for anything quite like this. Marcus had managed to convince his supervisor, Ray Kowalski, to let him set up a temporary space for Eli while he figured out what to do next. Ray, a gruff Polish-American in his 60s who'd raised 4 kids of his own, had taken one look at the frightened boy and simply nodded. "Kid can stay as long as he needs to," Ray had said quietly. "But Marcus, you know this can't be permanent. That boy needs proper care, proper schooling." Marcus knew Ray was right, but the thought of turning Eli over to the system that had already failed him felt like a betrayal. Over the past 3 days, he'd watched the boy begin to emerge from his shell, seeing glimpses of the intelligent, curious child hidden beneath layers of fear and trauma. Eli sat cross-legged on an old camping cot Marcus had brought from home, carefully coloring in a coloring book with the intense concentration that seemed to characterize everything he did. His small tongue poked out slightly from the corner of his mouth as he stayed meticulously within the lines, creating a picture of a house with a red roof and blue shutters. "That's a nice house," Marcus observed, settling into a folding chair beside the cot. "Tell me about it." Eli looked up, his dark eyes still cautious, but warmer than they'd been when Marcus first found him. "It's got a big kitchen," he said quietly, "and a yard where dogs can run around. And—" he hesitated, as if the next words were almost too precious to speak aloud. "And a room that's just for one kid, not shared with nobody else." Marcus felt his chest tighten. In those simple words, he heard all of Eli's dreams: stability, safety, and the simple dignity of having a space that belonged to him alone. It was heartbreaking how modest the boy's wishes were, and how impossible they'd seemed until now. "Sounds like a perfect house," Marcus said. "What else would it have?" "A dad," Eli said without hesitation, then immediately looked down at his coloring book as if he'd revealed too much. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of all the times he'd wanted children, all the conversations with his ex-wife about starting a family that had ended in disappointment and eventual resentment. Sarah had wanted the traditional path: marriage, pregnancy, biological children who looked like them and carried on their genetic legacy. When that hadn't happened naturally, she'd wanted expensive fertility treatments, adoption agencies, the whole complex machinery of modern family planning. But sitting here with Eli, watching the boy carefully color his dream house, Marcus realized that family had nothing to do with genetics or legal paperwork. It was about showing up, about being present, about creating safety in a world that too often felt dangerous and unpredictable. "Eli," Marcus said carefully, "what if I told you I've been thinking about that house too? What if I said I might know where we could find one?" The boy's crayon stopped moving. He looked up at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror, the look of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to trust easily but couldn't quite stop himself from wanting to believe. "You mean it?" Eli whispered. "I mean it," Marcus confirmed. "But first, we need to talk about some important things. Legal things. Grown-up things that might be complicated." Over the next hour, Marcus explained as gently as he could what it would mean for them to become a real family. There would be lawyers and social workers, interviews and home inspections, background checks and court hearings. The foster system would have to be involved, at least initially, and there would be no guarantees about the outcome. "They might say no," Eli asked, his voice small and scared. "They might," Marcus admitted, hating himself for having to be honest about the possibility. "But I'm going to fight for you, Eli. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we get to stay together." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of abandonment and disappointment. Marcus considered his answer carefully. How could he explain to an 8-year-old boy that sometimes the universe presents you with exactly what you didn't know you were looking for? How could he describe the way his heart had recognized something in Eli from the very first moment? Not just the need to rescue, but the deeper recognition of kinship, of belonging. "Because you're supposed to be my son," Marcus said finally. "I don't know how I know that, but I do. Maybe I've been waiting my whole life to find you hiding in that barrel." For the first time since Marcus had found him, Eli smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face and gave Marcus a glimpse of the joyful child he could become with love and security. That afternoon, Marcus made the phone calls he'd been dreading. First to Child Protective Services, to report that he'd found an unaccompanied minor and wanted to explore legal guardianship. Then to a family lawyer recommended by Ray's daughter, who worked in social services. Finally, to his own landlord, to ask about breaking his lease so he could find a place suitable for raising a child. Each conversation was complicated, filled with bureaucratic requirements and legal hurdles that seemed designed to discourage rather than facilitate family formation. But Marcus persevered, taking notes and following up on every lead, driven by the memory of Eli's smile and the promise he'd made to himself in that barrel 3 days ago. The social worker, Janet Martinez, arrived at the scrapyard the next morning. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the slightly weary demeanor of someone who'd seen too much of what people could do to children. But Marcus could tell she was good at her job, thorough, fair, and genuinely concerned about Eli's welfare. "Mr. Williams," she said after interviewing both Marcus and Eli separately, "I have to be honest with you. The process of adoption, especially for a single man with no prior experience as a parent, is going to be challenging. There will be extensive background checks, home studies, parenting classes, and supervised visits before any permanent placement could be considered." Marcus felt his heart sink, but Janet wasn't finished. "However," she continued, "Eli's case is complicated by his history of running away from previous foster placements. He's clearly bonded with you in a way he hasn't with other potential caregivers. Given that, and given your evident commitment to his welfare, I'm prepared to recommend emergency temporary guardianship while we work through the formal process." "What does that mean exactly?" Marcus asked. "It means you can take him home tonight," Janet said with a small smile. "It means he'll be placed in your care while we do all the paperwork and evaluations. It's not permanent, not yet, but it's a start." When Marcus told Eli the news, the boy's reaction was so intense it took Marcus completely by surprise. Eli threw his small arms around Marcus's waist and held on as if he were drowning, and Marcus was the only solid thing in a stormy sea. "I knew you'd keep your promise," Eli whispered against Marcus's shirt. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." That evening, as they drove through Detroit toward Marcus's apartment, Eli pressed his face against the passenger window and watched the city lights blur past. He'd been quiet since leaving the scrapyard, and Marcus worried that the reality of the situation was overwhelming him. "You okay, son?" Marcus asked, the word son feeling both natural and miraculous on his tongue. "Yeah," Eli said softly. "Just thinking." "About what?" Eli was quiet for a long moment. "About how I used to think nobody would ever want me. Foster people, they got lots of kids. I wasn't special or nothing. Just another mouth to feed." Marcus pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face Eli fully. "Listen to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are special. You are wanted. And you are going to be my son not because I need another mouth to feed, but because my life is better with you in it." As they sat there in the growing darkness, with the city of Detroit sprawling around them in all its broken beauty, Marcus realized that finding Eli hadn't just saved the boy's life. It had given Marcus's life a meaning and purpose he'd never known he was missing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more paperwork, more hurdles to overcome. But tonight, they were going home together, and that was enough to build a future on. The courtroom in downtown Detroit felt cavernous and intimidating, its high ceilings and formal wooden furnishings designed to inspire respect for the law, but having the opposite effect on 8-year-old Eli, who sat pressed against Marcus's side in the front row of the gallery. 6 weeks had passed since that first night in Marcus's apartment. 6 weeks of supervised visits, psychological evaluations, home inspections, and endless paperwork. Marcus adjusted his tie nervously, the same tie he'd worn to his wedding 15 years ago and hadn't touched since his divorce. His lawyer, Patricia Chun, had insisted that appearances mattered in family court, that judges formed impressions in the first 30 seconds that could influence their decisions throughout the proceedings. "Remember," Patricia whispered as they waited for Judge Rebecca Thompson to enter, "answer questions directly, but don't volunteer information. Let me handle the legal arguments. Your job is to show them you're a stable, loving father who can provide for Eli's needs." Marcus nodded, though his palms were sweating despite the courthouse's aggressive air conditioning. Across the aisle, the state's attorney, David Richardson, was reviewing his notes with the mechanical efficiency of someone who handled dozens of similar cases every month. To Richardson, this was just another file, another day at the office. To Marcus, it was everything. Janet Martinez, the social worker who'd become their advocate over the past month and a half, gave Marcus an encouraging nod from her seat behind the prosecutor's table. Her final report, Marcus knew, would carry significant weight with the judge. Janet had conducted 3 unannounced home visits, interviewed Marcus's neighbors and coworkers, and spent hours observing his interactions with Eli. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Thompson entered the courtroom. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades making difficult decisions about children's lives. As the formal proceedings began, Marcus listened to the state's case with growing anxiety. Richardson methodically laid out the concerns: Marcus's lack of experience with children, his modest income as a scrapyard worker, his small apartment in a neighborhood with above-average crime statistics, and his status as a single man in a system that traditionally favored married couples. Your Honor, Richardson concluded, while Mr. Williams's intentions appear to be genuine, we must consider whether this placement serves the best interests of the child. Eli Morrison has already experienced significant trauma and instability. The state has identified a foster family, the Hendersons, who have successfully raised 3 adopted children and can provide the structured, experienced environment that Eli needs. Marcus felt his heart sink as Richardson described the Henderson family. Both parents were college graduates. They lived in a suburban home with a large yard, and Mrs. Henderson was a former elementary school teacher who now stayed home full-time. On paper, they sounded perfect, everything Marcus wasn't. But when Patricia stood to present their case, Marcus was reminded why Ray's daughter had recommended her so highly. Your Honor, Patricia began, this case isn't about what looks good on paper. It's about what works in real life. It's about a bond that formed naturally between a man and a child who found each other when they both needed it most. Patricia called Janet Martinez as their first witness. Janet's testimony was measured but powerful, describing the transformation she'd observed in Eli over the past 6 weeks. In my 15 years as a social worker, Janet told the court, I've rarely seen a child adapt to a placement as successfully as Eli has with Mr. Williams. The boy who was found hiding in a barrel, afraid to speak above a whisper, now participates eagerly in conversations, helps with household chores, and has begun to show interest in school activities. What about Mr. Williams's lack of formal parenting experience? Richardson asked during cross-examination. Mr. Williams has approached parenting with the same dedication he brings to everything else in his life. Janet replied, he's attended every parenting class I recommended, read every book I suggested, and sought advice from other parents in his building. Experience can be gained, Your Honor. What can't be taught is the genuine love and commitment I've witnessed between these two. Patricia then called Dr. Sarah Kim, the child psychologist who'd been working with Eli. Dr. Kim's testimony focused on Eli's emotional progress and the importance of maintaining the attachment he'd formed with Marcus. Eli has experienced multiple disruptions in his attachment relationships, Dr. Kim explained. Moving him again, even to what might appear to be a more advantageous situation, could be psychologically devastating. The stability he's found with Mr. Williams has allowed him to begin processing his trauma and developing the trust necessary for healthy emotional development. When Marcus was called to testify, his mouth felt dry as sandpaper. Patricia had prepared him for this moment, but facing the judge's direct gaze while trying to articulate why he should be allowed to keep Eli felt impossibly daunting. Mr. Williams, Patricia began gently. Tell the court about your relationship with Eli. Marcus took a deep breath and looked at Eli, who was watching him with complete trust in his dark eyes. Your Honor, I never planned to become a father this way. I never planned to find a little boy hiding in my workplace, scared and hungry and alone. But from the moment I met Eli, I knew he was meant to be my son. What makes you think you can provide what Eli needs? Judge Thompson asked directly. I can't give him everything, Marcus admitted. I can't give him a big house or expensive toys or college funds. But I can give him something he's never had before, someone who will never give up on him. Someone who will be there every morning when he wakes up and every night when he goes to sleep. Someone who loves him not because he's convenient or because he fits into a plan, but because he's exactly who he is. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. Eli and we understand each other. We both know what it's like to feel like you don't quite fit anywhere. We both know what it's like to wonder if anyone would notice if you disappeared. But together we fit. Together we matter. The courtroom was quiet as Marcus returned to his seat. Judge Thompson reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity before speaking. This is a difficult case, she began, because both options represent genuine care for this child's welfare. The Henderson family would undoubtedly provide excellent care and opportunities for Eli. However, the court must consider not just what might be ideal in theory, but what will actually serve this particular child's best interests. Judge Thompson looked directly at Eli, who sat up straighter under her gaze. "Eli," she said gently, "you're 8 years old, which means the court values your opinion about your own life. Can you tell me how you feel about living with Mr. Williams?" Eli stood up, his small frame dwarfed by the formal courtroom setting, but his voice was clear and determined. "He's my dad," Eli said simply. "He found me when I was lost, and he kept all his promises. I want to stay with him forever." Judge Thompson nodded slowly. "Mr. Williams, approaching this placement will require ongoing support and monitoring. You'll need to complete additional parenting courses, maintain regular contact with social services, and ensure that Eli receives appropriate educational and psychological support." Marcus felt his heart pounding as he waited for the judge's decision. "However," Judge Thompson continued, "it's clear that you and Eli have formed a genuine family bond. The court finds that maintaining this relationship serves Eli's best interests. I'm therefore approving the adoption petition and granting you full legal custody of Eli Morrison, who will henceforth be known as Eli Williams." The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through Marcus's entire body. Eli launched himself into Marcus's arms, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Around them, Patricia was shaking hands with Janet Martinez, who was wiping tears from her own eyes. "We did it," Marcus whispered into Eli's hair. "We're officially a family." "I knew we would be," Eli whispered back. "I knew from that very first day when you brought me the granola bar. I knew you were going to be my dad." As they walked out of the courthouse together, Marcus realized that his life had been completely transformed by finding a scared child hiding in a barrel. But the real miracle wasn't that he'd saved Eli. It was that Eli had saved him right back. 2 years later, Marcus stood in the front yard of a small blue house with white trim, watching 9-year-old Eli chase their new puppy, Rusty, around the modest but well-maintained lawn. The October afternoon was crisp and bright, with the kind of golden light that made ordinary moments feel magical. The house wasn't exactly like the one Eli had colored in that first week at the scrapyard. The roof was green, not red, and there were no blue shutters, but it had everything that mattered. 3 bedrooms, including one that belonged to Eli alone, a kitchen big enough for the 2 of them to cook together, and a yard where an energetic golden retriever puppy could run to his heart's content. "Dad," Eli called out, his voice bright with laughter as Rusty bowled him over with enthusiastic affection. "He's trying to let my face off." Marcus grinned, marveling at how natural that word, "Dad," had become. In the 2 years since the adoption was finalized, Eli had grown 3 inches and gained 15 pounds of healthy weight. More importantly, he'd gained confidence, curiosity, and the secure knowledge that he was loved unconditionally. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. There had been nightmares during those first few months, episodes where Eli would wake up screaming, convinced that Marcus had disappeared or that social workers were coming to take him away. There had been struggles in school as Eli worked to catch up academically after his chaotic early education. There had been moments when Marcus had questioned whether he was doing enough, whether he was equipped to handle the complex needs of a child who'd experienced trauma. But they'd worked through each challenge together, with the help of Dr. Kim, Janet Martinez, who'd become a family friend, and the surprising support network that had emerged in their diverse Detroit neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez next door had taught Marcus how to braid Eli's hair properly for school. Mr. Johnson from down the street had helped Marcus build a treehouse in their backyard. The elderly couple across the street, the Kowalskis, had become surrogate grandparents, always ready with homemade cookies and patient ears for Eli's endless stories. "Dad, come play with us," Eli shouted, interrupting Marcus's reflections. Marcus laughed and jogged over to join the game, grabbing Eli around the waist and spinning him in circles, while Rusty barked excitedly and jumped around their legs. These were the moments Marcus treasured most, the ordinary, everyday moments of being a family. Later that evening, as they sat on the front porch steps, sharing a bowl of ice cream and watching the sun set over their neighborhood, Eli grew thoughtful. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you ever think about that day when you found me?" "Every day," Marcus replied honestly. Why do you ask? Eli was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts with the careful consideration that had become one of his defining characteristics. Sometimes I have dreams about it. Not bad dreams, he clarified quickly. Good dreams. I dream about hearing your voice calling to me, telling me it was going to be okay. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. What do you remember most about that day? I remember being so scared, Eli said. But I also remember thinking that your voice sounded kind, like maybe you weren't going to hurt me. And when you gave me that granola bar, he smiled at the memory. I hadn't eaten anything real in 2 days. It tasted like the best thing in the whole world. You were so brave, Marcus told him. Braver than you should have had to be. I wasn't brave, Eli protested. I was just surviving. But you were brave. You took a chance on a weird kid hiding in a barrel. Marcus pulled Eli closer, wrapping his arm around his son's shoulders. Best chance I ever took. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their neighbors return home from work. Kids riding bicycles on the sidewalk. The normal rhythms of a community settling into evening. Marcus thought about how different his life had become since that morning at the scrapyard. He'd been promoted to supervisor at Riverside Scrap Metal, partly because his colleagues had been so impressed by his dedication to Eli. He discovered that he actually enjoyed coaching Eli's Little League team and had developed unexpected friendships with other parents. His small apartment had been replaced by this house. His solitary existence transformed into a life filled with purpose and connection. Dad, Eli said suddenly, my teacher wants to meet with you next week. Marcus felt a familiar flutter of parental anxiety. Everything okay at school? Eli grinned. Yeah, everything's great. She wants to talk to you about the gifted program. She thinks I should apply. Marcus felt a surge of pride, so intense it was almost overwhelming. Eli, who had been so far behind academically when they'd first met, was now being recommended for advanced programs. It was a testament to his natural intelligence, his determination to succeed, and the stability that had allowed his potential to flourish. That's incredible, son, Marcus said. I'm so proud of you. It's because you helped me, Eli said matter-of-factly, with homework and reading and stuff, and because you made me feel like I was smart, even when I didn't know things other kids knew. As they prepared for bed that night, following the routine they'd established over 2 years of being a family, Marcus reflected on how finding Eli had changed his understanding of what it meant to be a father. He'd always imagined fatherhood as something that happened gradually. 9 months of pregnancy, a birth, a baby who grew slowly into a child you came to know over years of daily interaction. But with Eli, fatherhood had arrived all at once, fully formed and urgently needed. There had been no time to ease into the role, no opportunity to learn gradually. Marcus had become a father in an instant, in the moment he decided to approach that barrel and see who was hiding inside. Dad, Eli's voice came from his bedroom as Marcus was turning off the hall light. Yeah, buddy. I love you. I love you too, son. More than you'll ever know. I know exactly how much, Eli replied with the confidence of a child who'd never had reason to doubt his father's love. The same amount I love you back. Marcus smiled as he headed to his own bedroom, Rusty padding along beside him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments of ordinary magic that made up the fabric of their lives together. Eli had a Little League game on Saturday, a science project due on Monday, and a birthday party to attend next weekend. The busy, complicated, wonderful schedule of a child who was fully engaged with the world around him. As Marcus settled into bed, he thought about the letter he'd been meaning to write to his ex-wife, Sarah. She'd remarried 2 years ago and was expecting her first child with her new husband. He wanted to tell her that he understood now why family had been so important to her, why she'd been willing to fight so hard for the chance to become a mother. He wanted to tell her that he was grateful for the pain of their divorce, because it had led him to be available when Eli needed him most. But mostly, he wanted to tell her that love really could transform everything, that a scared man and a starving child could find each other in the most unlikely circumstances and create something beautiful together. Outside his window, Detroit slept around them, a city of survivors, of people who'd learned to find hope in the most unlikely places. And in a small blue house with white trim, A father and son who'd found each other when they both needed saving most continued the daily miracle of being a family. Marcus closed his eyes and smiled, remembering the sound of Eli's laughter echoing across their backyard that afternoon. Tomorrow he would wake up and be someone's dad again, and there was no better feeling in the world than that. In the room down the hall, Eli clutched his favorite stuffed animal, a small brown bear Marcus had bought him during their first week together, and dreamed of baseball games and science projects and all the ordinary adventures that lay ahead. He no longer dreamed of hiding in barrels or running from people who were supposed to care for him. Instead, he dreamed of the house with the green roof where love lived, where someone would always be there to make sure he was safe, fed, and cherished. He dreamed of the dad who'd kept every promise he'd ever made, and of the family they'd built together from nothing more than hope and the courage to care for each other. And in the morning, they would wake up and continue writing their story. The man who'd learned that family isn't about blood or biology, and the boy who'd learned that home isn't a place, but a person who will never let you face the world alone. Marcus Williams stood at the edge of the baseball diamond, watching his 14-year-old son Eli pitch in the championship game of the Detroit Youth League. The scared, malnourished child who'd hidden in a barrel 7 years ago had grown into a confident young man with broad shoulders, steady hands, and the kind of quiet leadership that made his teammates look to him in crucial moments. "Strike 3, the umpire called, and the crowd erupted in cheers as Eli's team secured their victory. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he watched Eli's teammates mob him on the pitcher's mound, their joy infectious and pure. Later, as they drove home with the championship trophy in the back seat, Eli turned to Marcus with a serious expression. "Dad, I've been thinking about something," he said. "About what I want to do when I grow up." "Yeah, what's that?" "I want to be a social worker," Eli said without hesitation. "Like Ms. Martinez. I want to help kids who don't have anybody, kids who are hiding and scared like I was." Marcus felt his heart swell with pride. This was who Eli had become, not just a survivor, but someone who wanted to use his experience to help others survive too. "I think you'd be amazing at that," Marcus said quietly. "You understand what those kids are going through in a way most people never could. Will you help me figure out how to do it? College and stuff." "Son," Marcus said, pulling into their driveway, "I'll help you with anything you want to do. That's what dads are for." As they walked into their house, the same blue house with white trim, now filled with 7 years of memories, photographs, and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The scared man who'd found a child hiding in a barrel had learned to be brave through loving someone who needed him. The abandoned boy who'd believed no one would ever want him had discovered that family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up for each other, day after day, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. That night, as they had for 7 years, Marcus checked on Eli before going to bed. His son was at his desk, working on homework by the light of a small lamp, Rusty curled up at his feet. The room was decorated with baseball trophies, science fair ribbons, and photos of friends, all the evidence of a childhood that had been reclaimed and made whole. "Good night, son," Marcus said softly. "Good night, Dad," Eli replied, looking up with a smile that still had the power to stop Marcus's heart. "Thanks for finding me." "Thanks for letting me," Marcus replied, as he did every night. As Marcus turned off the hall light and headed to his own room, he thought about all the children out there who were still hiding, still waiting for someone to find them and refused to give up on them. Tomorrow, Eli would be one day closer to becoming the person who could reach those children, and Marcus couldn't think of a better legacy for the scared little boy who'd hidden in a barrel and the lonely man who'd found him there. Love, Marcus had learned, was the most ordinary miracle of all, and sometimes it began with nothing more than a willingness to look inside the dark places where hope had gone to hide, and refuse to walk away without bringing it back into the light.